These floppy disks and this tape are all I have to restore this server. 27 years in IT support, and never before have I ever done what I'm about to do. Not even once, and there's a good reason for that. It was called One Button Disaster Recovery, and you'll see later on in the video why that's a misleading title. I installed Veritas Backup Exec for dozens of customers, but actually use it to recover a server? Recovery was never tested, so let's find out if I can get One Button Disaster Recovery to actually work. The irony of this was that in a small business, you set up the software, you configured it, and you moved on. There was never time to do a recovery. Not once did I do a test of a disaster recovery for a customer. There simply wasn't the time, and they wouldn't pay for it either when you offered it to them, because I did do that, but no one wants to pay for insurance. So this is going to be a first one-button disaster recovery from the HP DAT72 tape drive using Veritas 9.1, and we're going to see whether this would have really recovered this HP ML350 G4P in the event of a disaster. Did you go through this experience? Put something in the comments and let me know if you did. I'd love to hear from other people that had a similar feeling to me. They knew they had backup software in place and they knew that the customer server might fail, but they'd never had the chance to practice the recovery. Did it weigh heavy on you? And when it did happen, how did you cope with it? Love to find out. Small Business Server 2003 is installed and the tape drive is also installed. That 72 drive. Now, one of the things I always did when I set up a server was get remote access, so I didn't have to go to the server wherever it was. Sometimes in a cabinet, sometimes locked in a cupboard, sometimes under the stairs, who knew? So I've enabled remote desktop. One little caveat with this version, 2003 didn't have Windows Firewall built in, but 2003 Small Business Server did, because it was released about 5 to 6 months later and they'd included the firewall by then. So that switched on. So I added the exception for remote desktop, which means I can connect to it from my Mac, which is where I'm sat at the moment. Right, let's get into Veritas Backup then. We can set up a backup job here. But before we start all of that, what we're going to have a look at is intelligent disaster recovery. We're going to need this to do the one button disaster recovery process. So what this would do is it creates a situation where if the server hard drives have all failed, but you've still got the original server chassis, you can boot using a CD or a tape drive or a set of boot disks and a CD. Now what we want to do is one button disaster recovery with a tape drive. So we want to create a bootable tape image for use with the tape drive. Now that's going to say we need a Windows installation CD for that process, which means we need Small Business Server CD1. Now I don't have that, but I do have Small Business Server ISO. So going to my computer, we can see I haven't got that ISO file as a drive, but I've installed a bit of software that lets me mount it as a virtual drive. There it is, Small Business Server CD. So we can now choose which drive has got the CD image on it. Well, it's drive F, which I've just made. And we can add the automated system recovery files. Now what that was that was part of Windows that was introduced in XP in 2003, and it contains what the partitions were on your system. So let's say you had 3 partitions, a C drive, a D drive, and a G drive. Instead of having to recreate those when you reinstall the operating system and the backup, this will do it for you. So as part of the process, this will automatically partition the drives. Now it's quite simple for us. We've got C drive. It's not really overly complicated. However, this would be helpful if you had a complicated partition setup and maybe you didn't document it, so you didn't really know what it was after the server had failed. If you had this in place, it would know what it was for you and you wouldn't have to remember it. I'm going to add it to the image. That means it's going to flow through as we do the restore. I don't have to get a floppy disk out. Now this error is interesting. It's referencing an E drive. So all I can think here is that it's creating some kind of virtual drive in the background that we can't see, because there's no E drive on this. We've got C, A, D, and F. We haven't got an E. So I can only think that's creating something in the background. And the error seems to be about the file paths being too long. There's a maximum amount of characters that can be in a file path in Windows. I think it's 256 was the maximum. But what I've noticed when I had a look at this earlier on is it will bypass that error and it will continue with the process. Now the text setup.cif, that's the file for the automated recovery of a server. So it is creating the process of an unattended Windows installation, but it's replacing that file there with the disaster recovery file from Veritas. So Veritas is kind of using half of the Windows tools for an unattended setup and half of its own tools to create this custom format for recovering a server from the tape drive with very little intervention. And yes, this is the bit I never ever did when I was in the job. There would have never been time for this. By the time I got the backup software installed, was probably one of the last things that you did, and you'd run a test backup. You'd already planned to install this at customers. There was no way you were going to be able to then go and recover the entire server back to itself before it had been delivered. Another error again, but you can go back and try again, which doesn't do anything, or you can cancel. There's no OK. By clicking cancel, we're actually clicking OK. So what's happened now is, if we go back into the wizard again, and we choose bootable tape image, this one, activate the image. You have to do this. You've got to activate the image. Now that image is live, the next thing that we're going to do is we create a full backup to tape. After that process, we'll create 2 floppy disks that are used for the recovery process. Yes, that's right. Even though it says we're doing a bootable tape image, you still got to have 1 floppy disk with the intelligent disaster recovery information on it. So let's do a backup now. Simple process for us. Backup everything. Device and media. Overwrite. I'm not going to verify to speed the process up. I'm going to run that back up. Click job monitor. Tape drive's whirring in the background, and that's going to start backing up, and we'll come back to this. The backup was successful. What you have to do now is go in and run the intelligent disaster recovery again and update with the backup that has just been completed. And now I need to put the first disk into the floppy disk drive. Okay. That's now updated that disk, which it will ask for when we do the 1-button disaster recovery process. That is everything completed and ready to actually do a recovery of the server as if it had failed. So let's get it done. Before we do the recovery, we're going to take one step to make sure that we can come back and do it again if we need to, without having to reinstall the operating system by hand. And that is, I'm going to break the mirror. I'm going to remove the first disk in the RAID 1 array. What that means is, it will be detected by the array controller, but it will start up from this disk. And that's the disk we're going to do the restore to. And if anything goes wrong and the process doesn't work and this disk is wiped, we plug this disk back in again and we'll be able to start the operating system. And then we can plug that disk back in again, and this one will copy onto that, and we're back to where we started. Back in front of the server now, it will detect that the tape drive has got a tape that's compliant with booting from. And that's going to come up on the screen in just a moment. There it is, bootable media located. And that means the tape drive can be booted from. But before it gets to that, it's going to see that we've removed one of the disks from the RAID array. There's the controller telling us that there's a fault and we can carry on through and boot. So I've pressed the F2 key to carry on with the boot process and ignore the fact that we've deliberately broken the RAID array controller. Backup was always on the mind. Backup was always there. Could I get back to what I've done before I take the next step? And that's why I broke the RAID array controller. So I gave myself a way to go back to where I started from. Backup recovery screen in a beautiful purpley pink has appeared. And I'll press the F2 key now because we're not testing. We're going to do the process and it's going to go through and start what was called automated system recovery, which was a new feature that Microsoft had added to Windows XP and Windows 2003. It was really an enhancement of the emergency boot disk from Windows NT that really wasn't that good. And you can see on the screen now, Windows automated system recovery is going through the process, and that is reading off the CD image that we've got, the recovery information about the partition setup on the server, and all that information that was collated while we were doing the intelligent disaster recovery floppy disk drives. Breaking a RAID array takes me back to a time when I sent an engineer out to a customer on site, and the server had RAID 5 with 3 disks, and we knew that one of the disks had failed because there was a red light on it and the customer had seen it while they were changing their tape. The guy went out to site and he said, "Shall I remove the disk?" over the phone to me, and I said, "Yep, undo the thing and remove the disk and put in the new disk that I've given you." And as he removed the disk, he said, "The whole server's just gone off, boss." I went, "What's on the screen?" He goes, "Nothing, it's just all gone off, boss. And there's another red light on one of the other disks on the front of the server." I knew immediately what had happened. Dust was holding those disks together. It wasn't a server we built, it was one we inherited. And so I had to tell him over the phone, "Right, that server's completely failed. We're going to have to recover from backup. There's nothing you can do. The disks have failed. It's certainly got to come back to the workshop." That meant a difficult conversation with the customer, telling them on a Thursday morning that your server's now coming into the workshop and it's not going to be back anytime soon. I asked them for the backup tapes and they said, "Yes, sure, I'll get you the backup tapes." and I found that they'd been keeping the backup tapes in the kitchen next door on site on top of the microwave. Microwaves and tapes don't usually go well together. I got the server back to the office. I confirmed that indeed 2 hard drives out of 3 were dead and the RAID 5 array was lost, and so was all the data. We went from recovery from the backup tapes in the more old-fashioned way, installed the operating system and then recovered. However, we had a problem with the tapes. They had 5 tapes, and out of those 5 tapes, none of them had a complete full backup. Each one of them was damaged in some way because of being stored near the microwave, and the magnetic interference had damaged the tapes. Ultimately, I had to rebuild the small business server from scratch and then restore the data, which includes restoring SQL databases and Exchange databases. I can promise you that was not fun. It happened on a Thursday, and I worked all Friday, all Saturday, all Sunday, able to get it back on Monday. And then I had to go around the offices and connect all the computers back to the domain, because even though the domain was the same name, it wasn't the same domain. That was a pretty painful backup and recovery experience, to say the least. However, we achieved it, we did it, and we got the customer back up and running, even though it took 5 days. Our recovery is nearly complete. That 100% is going to flip over in just one moment to the next screen. And it's failed. We've got an error. We've got to look into why it hasn't got any further, and there's no other option here but to quit. F3 quit. That's it. We've got to start again. I've had an epiphany. I was up last night till 10 o'clock working on this exact problem, and I've realised where I've made my fundamental mistake. I've been working with Windows 2003 Small Business Server, R2, and I should have been working with the original version called RTM. It was released a couple of years before, because Veritas 9.1 that I've got is designed for that original version of Small Business Server. That's why we get the error when we try and create the CD image in this version. This version of Small Business Server R2 was released after Veritas 9.1, so it's not compatible. What I did last night was reinstall old version of Small Business Server, and when you go to create the CD image, it works. So I know that the restoration is going to work. In the next video, we're going to go through the process, and it will work, and it will do a recovery, and we're going to see screens that probably none of us in IT have ever seen before, because we never did this stuff. Appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Give me a subscribe if you like my videos. Click on the thumbs up. It means loads to me. I'm really enjoying this whole process of going back in and testing my mind and my metal and doing all the things that I wished I'd done in the past and re-troubleshooting and challenging myself. It's loads of fun, and I hope it's fun for you too. I'll see you on the next video. Ta-da!